Although folks, we're deep enough into patch 11.20 in Season 3 that we have a pretty decent handle on how it's all going, so I want to do one of my regular patch reviews, sharing my thoughts about the content and what bits worked, what bits didn't, and where I think the World of Warcraft dev team can improve on things. Before I dive into the patch storyline proper, I do think it's worth taking a look at how we got to Karesh, as it does have some impact on how the story has been received. Starting out with Xalatas attacking Dalaran, and we're left stuck on the island of Kazalgar, helping the local population, as we always do as adventurers, and exploring the mysterious causeway, a giant titan hole into the earth where we discover lost cultures such as Arathi refugees and the new Haranir race. After we smash Xalatath's dark heart, she travels to Undermine to get Gallywix to fix it up, while he mines the black blood of the old gods. While they're off doing their nefarious deeds, some goblins find a mysterious crystal on a mysterious island, and those goblins, along with a bunch of Arathi, get distracted by it, and we all head there to discover a bunch of pirate types doing island expeditions, and we fight them for some bits of iron. In the meantime, Gallywix's miners get a bit angry about his treatment of them, and they get themselves a union and blow a hole into the ringing deeps, which prompts Arwena to ask us to help her investigate what on earth they're doing with all of that black blood. This leads us into Undermine, where we end up fermenting a rebellion, at the same time as Gallywix gets himself conned by a bunch of ethereals and ends up giving them Xalatath's dark heart, which makes her really angry, and then she just leaves him to her tender mercies. After defeating Gallywix, we pass on the ownership of his casino to some new owners, who are so thankful that they reward us by not letting us actually enter it. After which a bunch of Arathi farmers and teachers ask us to help them with some ongoing attacks from Ashkahet, because apparently the Arathi military seem to have wandered off to the surface. No sooner do we get started on helping out the Arathi before their main hero, Farin Lothar, decides that in the midst of a crisis she needs to go off and find herself, so we're asked to escort her to the Arathi homeland in Stromgarde, where the Horde and their alliance are about to get into a war with each other due to a rebellion led by the same person who recently led another rebellion in the same area that caused the alliance and Horde to nearly fight each other. After dealing with that mess, we let the aforesaid rebel leader go free, because apparently just removing her title will totally stop a serial traitor from starting a third rebellion. Locust Walker then turns up to tell us that his destroyed planet is about to be destroyed by the thing that already destroyed it, and can we please come and help? Something so confusing that even Illyria starts to ask what on earth is going on. And so here we are, saving the day yet again. The patch 11.20 storyline begins with a lead-in cinematic, which portrays our character getting distracted by the sights and sounds of Tasavesh, ending up walking into someone as a result. Now, okay, this isn't exactly an exciting action moment, but it's probably the most lifelike portrayal of our player characters that I've ever seen in World of Warcraft. Despite the War Within's whiplash narrative, if you take the Kareshi campaign storyline in isolation, it is potentially the best executed questline that we've ever had in World of Warcraft. Xalatath has, throughout the expansion, consistently lit up every moment she's been in, and having her join us on our journey has allowed the writers to put her malicious manipulation in full display. What takes the story to new heights, though, is Illyria's sometimes angry and sometimes distressed reaction to being forced to work with Xalatath, while Xalatath drip feeds us the true story behind Locust Walker and the fall of Karesh, along with some brilliant, sarcastically mature dialogue from another old friend, Venari. Seeing the in-game characters react to each other and our own characters' actions in this way brought the characters to life in a way that I've just not experienced in World of Warcraft ever before, and I liked it a lot. This experience could very well have been the World of Warcraft dev team's greatest narrative achievement, and for those of us who experienced this story on the PTR, it was. But for most players, it was spoiled by 3 major issues in the final released version. The first of those was the Blizzard marketing team's decision to completely spoil the story's biggest twist by releasing the scene where Locust Walker reveals to us that our new ally was to be Xal'atath as a promotional cinematic, even before the patch is launched. The second and by far more serious issue though was timegating. Unlike the PTR version, which took the story all the way to the gates of the Manafoge Omega raid, a very natural stopping point, on the live game, the first week storyline just suddenly and abruptly stops in front of Venari with absolutely no real explanation. Now, I will acknowledge that on a second run through of the storyline, I could see that the developer's intention was to show us that we were waiting for a new army that we recruited from the Wastelanders to arrive. But that really didn't come across very clearly in the main questline, and a 7-day countdown bar that I know some players did see in-game was completely missing for me. On top of that, the final storyline was locked behind the final raid boss with the story mode opening just a few short hours before the reveal of the next expansion midnight, meaning that even for US players, most of whom were at work during the reveal, a significant majority of the player base got to see the start of the next installment of the World Soul saga, even before they could experience the end of the current one. And the final issue that the campaign had was bugs. Now, while nothing was completely broken, several quests did require relogging or resetting our user interfaces in order to continue, and this happened frequently enough to wring a lot of the fun out of the experience for me. Setting those issues aside though, and once you get to the end of the storyline, I did find that the final cinematic and the epilogue storyline was very enjoyable. The cinematic does an excellent job of smoothing out Xal'atath's transition from untrusted ally to major existential threat without turning her into a caricature. And it gives me a lot of confidence that her excellent portrayal is to continue. And while the in-game portrayal of the restoration of Koresh's World Soul could have benefited from being a lot more visually impactful, it was nevertheless still quite satisfying. And Venari's transformation from mercenary mystery to ecological saviour of our planet was very well handled, largely thanks to her blunt and cynical portrayal. And I do definitely hope that we will have reason to encounter Venari in the story in the future. I'm always in two minds whether or not to do the stories on the PTR or not, but in this case I was very glad that I did, as the PTR experience was outstanding. And it's incredibly sad to me that the majority of the player base instead got the time-gated version that they did. Moving on to the open world design, and Koresh, despite being significantly smaller than Dragonflight's Emerald Dream Zone, does an excellent job of depicting a shattered and broken world. And despite its smaller size, it still manages to feel very expansive, and the opportunity to have an open world version of Shadowlands Tazavesh, something that I always wanted, was just too good to miss. Gameplay wise, we have two big features: phase diving and ecological succession. Phase diving offers an alternative version of Koresh, similar to Mechagon's Other Place or Korthier's Rift, and sadly, like its predecessors, it honestly felt a bit pointless to me. Phase diving doesn't really offer any new gameplay opportunities, and it has a weirdly disconnected progression system which relies on the new artifact cloak, but was progressed by doing content that was completely unrelated, not just to phase diving, but for the most part, Koresh entirely. The other gameplay feature, ecological succession, was, despite being advertised by Blizzard as being available from day one of the patch, nowhere to be seen for the first week. And that time gating sadly set the scene for the rest of the feature, which for the most part consists of a time-gated questline split over 4 weeks with 2 episodes per week, and which unlocks twice weekly repeatable quests, which are supposed to upgrade the animals we collect for the Ecodome. I say supposed to because the user interface support for the progression of the animals is hidden behind obscure flavor text that you can read by clicking on a console, which doesn't even look like it should be clicked upon. Now, to be very clear, my use of the word time gating is very intentional, as the twice per week for 4 weeks pacing of ecological succession combined with the user interface issue I already mentioned, makes the feature both confusing and frustrating. And even as I arrive at the end of it, it's not entirely clear to me what I've achieved in-game by doing so. This feature did have a ton of potential, but instead ends up feeling very undercooked, and I cannot help but think that perhaps the development team took on a little bit too much by trying to deliver both ecological succession and phase diving in a single patch, and that it might have been better had they just focused all in on ecological succession. Beyond the major gameplay features and the usual staples of rares, treasures and world quests are all present, but with the world quests only resetting twice a week, and the rares and treasures in my view not offering very much reason to do them more than once or twice, except of course for the 2 that drop mounts, and you can easily clear the map in a single play session, meaning that subsequent visits can leave Karesh feeling very devoid of, well, anything to do at all. And this has the side effect of making Karesh feel like just another weekly chore to do, rather than being repeatable content which offers a genuine alternative to instance content. Moving quickly on to the new artifact cloak, and the development team have managed to avoid the issues with previous artifacts like Legion's weapons and the BFA neck by making the upgrade process very unobtrusive through limited cap progress that most people can just get by playing the game. But with its progression rewards being mostly limited to phase diving and stat increases, it's also not really very interesting, and the end result is that it locks out a character slot from normal gear progression. And in fact, for raiders, it actually locks out 2 slots, as we can empower it a little by also getting special boots from the raid. Add in the Season 2 Titan Disc belt, which locks out the waist slot until or unless you can get a myth track belt, on top of all of the usual restrictions around farming tier, and you're left with only a small handful of slots that you can actually progress freely. So in case you haven't guessed, I'm personally not a fan of this approach to character itemization. Moving on now to the big endgame content, and the Manafoge Omega raid, while disappointingly small for a final Season 3 raid at only 8 bosses, some of which are supposedly optional, but not really, it does manage to offer a series of interesting and sometimes even unusual encounters. The final boss is a particular standout. While Blizzard's marketing of a boss that was bigger than Stormwind did get a fairly cynical response from me, it really does manage to offer an experience which makes us feel like we are fighting something truly massive, fusing the visual spectacle of a Final Fantasy XIV encounter with World of Warcraft's buttery smooth end of expansion combat. Mythic Plus, after very significant improvements in Season 2, was very much a case of steady as she goes, albeit with a very noticeable drop in difficulty, which is allowing players to make faster progress than I think we've ever experienced before. This is most likely in part due to Legion Remix, which will also have Mythic Plus and is coming out in just a few weeks, which means the World of Warcraft team are not so worried about the season running out of steam than they might otherwise have done. Looking at all that we can expect over the rest of the year, be it Remix, player housing, or of course the midnight testing cycle, this, I think, is a good decision, albeit I do worry that with a planned stat squish for Midnight, combined with the usual Season 1 lack of gear at the start, that the need for the developers to rein us back in power-wise for Midnight will feel a lot more jarring than usual. An honourable mention goes to the new Ecodome Aldani dungeon, which demonstrates clearly the lessons that the dev team have learned over the course of the War Within, offering an experience that is well on track to be my favourite dungeon for this expansion. For delves, and we get to see continued iteration and innovation with the addition of a new ethereal waygate system, which from time to time allows us to cut a delve short with a boss rush style event, while still getting all of the same rewards. The new Delve Archival Assault makes clever use of the Azure Vault dungeon space, something that I do like a lot in principle. Having both delves and dungeons take place in the same spaces has the potential to enable the dev team to deliver a lot more experiences overall. This new delve has a lot of innovative features, such as transporter networks, which are interesting, but for me it did end up giving it a very confusing and difficult to navigate layout. So while I can appreciate the effort that went into it, it's kind of not for me. Overall, the iteration during the War Within means that delves have landed in a much better place for players who want meaningful progress and generally repeatable content, which is available for solo or small group play, or who just want an alternative to dungeon speedruns. That said, there have been a couple of hiccups this season. I've never been a massive fan of the coffer key system to unlock end of delve rewards, but I do understand why it exists. Guaranteed drop gear is just too powerful to be fully farmable, and the team did do a good job of making the process of obtaining keys feel relatively unobtrusive in the first 2 seasons. However, the decision to make us do what in previous seasons was 4 keys worth of work in older zones only to reward us 2 keys is kind of frustrating. Having to do everything that we've been doing for almost an entire year plus a bunch of new stuff just to get the same progress each week kind of feels a bit like they are sweating an asset, although a recent hotfix does seem to have increased the number of keys that we can get from Koresh, and I do think that that will make it feel a lot better. Unlocking the Delver's bounty maps behind the Delver's journey made that feel a lot more like a mandatory chore than a cool incentive to dive in. I get the rationale behind wanting to avoid us getting a map in the pre-season week, but getting a heroic piece gear in the week 1 of season 2 did not make the sky fall in the game, so I don't really understand why the team wanted to effectively get it to week 2 or 3 this time around. Now, there really isn't a lot to say about PvP, mainly because, as has been the theme for the rest of the War Within, it's just kinda been left to its own, which, if you like the content, is great. But if you're looking for something fresh, then yet again I think PvP players may get to be a bit disappointed with only a new PvP World Quest island on Koresh, which really doesn't seem to me to offer much reason to visit it. So what does all of this mean for the patch as a whole? Well, for enjoyers of instance content, I do think that this has set up an excellent final season for the War Within, especially when combined with Legion Remix and the return of the mid-season turbo boost. But for open world players, I do think that the patch is very similar to the Emerald Dream in that it's a bit light in content, and I'm not convinced that it does have the legs to last even until the next patch, let alone until the release of Midnight, which means that Legion Remix and the final patch of the War Within with player housing are going to have to do some very heavy lifting. This all means that I have a lot of mixed feelings about patch 11.20. There is a lot to like here, but as a long-term lover of open world content, it has also disappointed me. In the Midnight reveal interview, game director Ian Hazzikostas does mention that he's aware that for some of us the open world feels, to use his words, a bit flat currently, which does give me some hope that this is on the team's radar. And I am keeping my fingers crossed that this will lead to the open world gameplay loops getting a bit more attention design wise. Anyways, that's it for my review of patch 11.20. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the new content. What parts have you liked and what parts have been a miss for you? Let me know in the comments down below. I'd also love to hear about what parts of the game are most interesting to you and what you'd like to see covered when the Midnight Alpha and Beta season opens up. If you found this update helpful, entertaining, or even just plain annoying, then do let me know by hitting that like icon. And if you want to support my channel to grow and help me to make more of these videos along with my other content, then hit that subscribe button right now before you forget. And if you don't want to miss out whenever I release a new video, then as well as subscribing, you can follow me in social media for more updates. My links are in the description below as well. That's all for now. Thanks for watching.